The day that envelope showed up, I honestly thought someone was trying to scam me. It was a cold Thursday morning in late October, and I was standing barefoot in my kitchen making coffee before work when I noticed the thick cream-colored envelope sitting near my apartment door. The return address belonged to a law office I had never heard of before. I opened it without thinking, but within minutes I was laughing so hard I had tears running down my face. My own parents had officially sent me a bill demanding $47,000 for the cost of raising me. My name is Natalie Carter, and by the time that envelope arrived, I had not spoken to my parents in a little over 2 years. Not a single call, not a text, nothing. I had spent those 2 years trying to rebuild myself after a lifetime of feeling unwanted inside my own family. I thought the silence meant everyone had finally moved on. Instead, my parents somehow found a way to turn my childhood into an invoice complete with itemized expenses for diapers, groceries, school supplies, and even electricity usage connected to my bedroom. I grew up outside Pittsburgh in one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looked identical and every family pretended everything was perfect. My father, Daniel Carter, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and my mother, Sharon Carter, managed the front desk at a dental office 3 days a week. They cared deeply about appearances. The house was spotless at all times, the cars were polished every weekend, and every family photo looked staged enough for a holiday catalog. From the outside, we looked happy. Inside the house, though, there was a very clear hierarchy. My older brother, Brandon, was the center of my parents' entire universe. He played football, dated cheerleaders, and carried himself like someone who had never once doubted his own importance. My father constantly called him his future. My mother treated him like a celebrity. I was different from the beginning. I liked books, debate competitions, and writing essays no one else wanted to read. I spent most of my childhood trying to earn praise that never came. No matter what I accomplished, it always felt smaller than whatever Brandon happened to be doing. When I was 10 years old, I won second place in a regional spelling competition. I came home carrying a little plastic trophy so proudly that my hands were shaking. My parents barely looked at it. My father asked why I missed first place, and my mother said second was still nice before walking away to finish preparing snacks for Brandon and his friends. That same weekend, Brandon scored 2 touchdowns in a middle school football game, and my parents threw a giant barbecue in our backyard to celebrate him. They invited neighbors, ordered a custom cake, and spent the entire evening talking about his bright future while my spelling trophy sat forgotten in a garage box. Things only became more obvious as we got older. In high school, I joined the debate team and absolutely loved it. I spent weekends practicing arguments and studying current events while my teammates became some of the closest friends I had ever made. During my junior year, I won multiple statewide competitions and qualified for a national event in Chicago. My parents never attended a single competition. Every time I asked, they said debate was not really important. Meanwhile, they never missed one of Brandon's football games. They wore school colors, hosted tailgates, and screamed his name from the bleachers like he was a professional athlete. One moment still sticks in my mind more than anything else. I had just won first place at the state finals after months of preparation. I called my parents from the lobby of the hotel, excited and emotional and desperate to hear them sound proud of me just once. My father answered and immediately asked whether I remembered to take chicken out of the freezer before leaving town. He barely reacted when I told him I won. I remember staring at my phone afterward feeling stupid for expecting anything different. College made the favoritism impossible to ignore. I earned a scholarship to a private liberal arts school in Massachusetts, but even with financial aid, I still needed help paying for housing and food. My parents contributed the bare minimum and reminded me constantly how expensive I was. I worked late nights at the campus library and took out loans just to survive. Brandon, meanwhile, attended my father's old university completely debt-free. My parents paid his tuition, bought him a car, and gave him spending money every month without hesitation. By the time I graduated, I owed over $30,000 in student loans. My parents showed up late to my graduation ceremony and left before dinner afterward because Brandon had plans with friends they did not want to miss. A year later, when Brandon graduated, they rented a banquet hall and hosted a giant celebration with catered food and professional decorations. I sat there watching people toast my brother while realizing my parents had never once celebrated me that way. After college, I moved to Boston and started working for a nonprofit youth organization. The pay was not impressive, but the work mattered to me. I helped teenagers from difficult backgrounds apply for college programs and scholarships. For the first time in my life, I felt useful and appreciated. My parents constantly criticized my career choice. They told me I was wasting my intelligence and should pursue something more profitable. Eventually, our conversations became so shallow and uncomfortable that we only spoke twice a year. The final explosion happened during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years before the envelope arrived. I drove home hoping maybe things would finally feel different now that we were all adults. Instead, I walked into another performance centered around Brandon and his fiancée, Chloe. My mother obsessed over wedding decorations while my father bragged nonstop about Brandon promotion at work. During dinner, my father raised his wine glass and gave a long emotional speech about how proud he was of his son. He talked about Brandon legacy, Brandon future family, Brandon success. I sat there silently while nobody acknowledged me at all. Something inside me finally snapped. I asked my parents why they always seemed willing to financially support Brandon while refusing to help me when I struggled with student loans. The entire table went quiet. My mother immediately accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. Then she listed all the things they had supposedly done for me growing up. She talked about food, clothes, housing, and sacrifices like I should spend the rest of my life apologizing for existing. My father eventually stood up and told me to leave his house if I could not show respect. So I left. I drove 300 miles back to Boston in the middle of the night with tears blurring my vision most of the way. After that, I cut contact completely. Therapy helped me understand that I had spent my entire life chasing affection from people who only valued me when I stayed quiet. Slowly, I built a better life. I made real friends. I adopted a rescue cat named Oliver. I started dating a man named Ethan who treated me with patience and kindness. For the first time, I felt emotionally safe. Then came the invoice. The document itself looked absurdly official. 12 pages long with detailed calculations for every expense my parents claimed they spent raising me from birth until adulthood. There were charges for school lunches, winter coats, birthday gifts, and part of the family mortgage because I occupied a bedroom. At the bottom was the total amount owed and a threat of legal action if I failed to repay them within 60 days. I laughed because the alternative was probably screaming. My best friend, Rachel, came over that night and read the entire thing twice. She looked horrified. I remember her saying nobody normal would ever do something like this to their own child. Deep down, though, I was not shocked. The invoice felt like the perfect summary of my relationship with my parents. Everything had always been transactional. Love came with conditions, approval came with comparisons. Even my existence apparently came with debt. The next morning, I hired a family attorney named Vanessa Reed. She read the paperwork carefully before leaning back in her chair looking genuinely stunned. She explained that parents legally cannot charge children for basic upbringing expenses. The whole thing was ridiculous and unenforceable. Still, she agreed we needed to respond firmly so my parents understood they could not intimidate me anymore. Vanessa drafted a brutal response letter. It professionally explained that raising a child is a legal and moral responsibility, not a financial investment expecting reimbursement. It also warned that any further harassment would result in counterclaims against my parents for emotional distress and frivolous legal threats. At the very end, Vanessa included one line suggesting my parents seek professional counseling instead of continuing this behavior. I nearly framed the letter. For several weeks I heard nothing. Then one evening my phone rang, and my brother's name appeared on the screen for the first time in years. He immediately accused me of humiliating our parents. According to him, the invoice was only meant to teach me gratitude. I asked whether he received a bill too. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in years. A month later, my Aunt Rebecca invited me to coffee. She admitted she had watched my parents treat me unfairly my entire life but never knew how to stop it. Then she handed me an envelope from my grandmother. My grandmother had passed away several years earlier, and inside was a handwritten letter explaining how deeply sorry she felt for the way my mother treated me. She wrote that she had always been proud of me even when nobody else said it out loud. Folded inside the letter was a check for $50,000. I just stared at it in complete shock while my aunt explained that my grandmother secretly set the money aside before she died because she worried my mother would keep me from receiving it. I cried right there in the coffee shop, not because of the money itself, but because someone in my family had actually seen me all along. I used the money carefully. I paid off the remaining balance on my student loans immediately. I placed a large portion into savings and used the rest to create a scholarship program for first-generation college students studying social work. I named it after my grandmother because she was the only person in my family who truly understood what kindness looked like. A few months later, My brother called one final time saying our parents wanted to reconnect. Not apologize, reconnect, that wording mattered. I told him I was no longer interested in relationships built on guilt and obligation. He called me selfish. I told him protecting my peace was not selfish at all. Then I blocked his number and never heard from him again. The following spring, I hosted brunch at my apartment for a group of close friends. We sat around my dining table eating pancakes and laughing until afternoon sunlight filled the entire room. Someone spilled coffee. Someone else told a ridiculous dating story that made everybody cry laughing. At one point, I looked around the table and realized something that completely changed me. Family is not automatically the people who raised you. Family is the people who make you feel loved, safe, and valued without keeping score. Later that night, I sat on my couch with my cat sleeping beside me and thought about everything that had happened. My parents tried to charge me for my childhood while my grandmother quietly gave me the chance to start over. Somehow life balanced itself in the strangest way possible. If there is one thing I learned from all of this, it is that nobody owes lifelong loyalty to people who treat them like a burden. Love is not a debt. Parenthood is not a business contract. And the moment someone starts making you feel guilty for simply existing, you have every right to walk away and build a better life somewhere else. I never spoke to my parents again after that. The truth is, once I finally understood my worth, I no longer needed them to tell me who I was.